Hey, good to see you. Thanks for coming. This is another episode of Wireframe brought to you by Design Systems House. I'm your host, Donnie D'Amato. That's my name. I swear I know my own name. Goodness gracious. I need to slow down, I think, in this thing. Anyway, we're talking about designing in code today, and I'm very happy to introduce you to my guest, Elyse Holladay. Elyse, thank you for joining me on the show today. Let the folks know who you are and what you're doing.
Yeah, thanks for having me. We've been trying to make this happen for a while, so glad to get two yappers in a room. We're gonna really have a good time. Um, my name's Elyse Holladay. I am a longtime design engineer, design systems expert. I'm currently at Color Health, where I own our design system and front-end platform, and have been really leading us towards, prototype first, AI-assisted design, and doing a lot of designing with code. I host On Theme, which is a design system podcast. You can check that out at designsystemsontheme.com. And then before that, had many, many years of design system experience at companies that you know of, like Indeed.com. And you may have seen me speak at a number of industry events like Zero Heights Converge, Clarity, CSS Conf, so on and so forth. So really been in this design engineering space, designing with code space for really my whole career, and excited about all the weird things that are happening right now.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that. And yeah, Elise is a powerhouse out there in terms of the speaking stuff. She's an absolute thought leader in the space. So I really
Thank you.
enjoy what she brings to the table here. And it's great to have you on the show. So today, we are talking about designing in code. If the last episode actually we had on Tuesday with Kelly Harrop, also a design engineer. So just absolutely flooding the week with design engineering talk today. So I hope you folks enjoy that. But designing in code. So where should we start here when it comes to designing in code? Should we start at the beginning? Should we start at what's going on now? What do you think?
Um, Maybe I actually think I want to start with a little bit of a definition.
Hell yeah.
And I think because there's so much newness happening, new tools happening, this idea of like designers being builders, designing, being able to design in code, designers should code, like the conversation about it is really, really different right now. And there's just a ton of stuff floating around. And so I think maybe let's just start with like, what do we even mean when we say designing in code or designing with code?
Okay. So, oh, you want
I'm
me to
interviewing you. What do you mean? Like,
me.
you
Let's
answer.
go with me. Okay. So designing for code for me, I guess I'm being interviewed on my own podcast. Fantastic. So designing code for me, I think is basically, I guess like the way that I used to do it was I used to, wireframe stuff, literally pencil and pen, right? And I still do that now on paper, and then translating that into code. So I'm skipping the step of the Figmas or the other
Mhm.
design tools that don't
Photoshop,
really
if
do it.
you're
Yeah,
old.
Photoshop back in the day, that don't really do anything, right? They
Mhm.
just like, here's the high fidelity thing. But now that I made the high fidelity thing, now I got to take the high fidelity and make it high fidelity again, and then make it usable in that thing. And I would just
Mhm.
skip the step because it was so much more efficient for me to do it. So I don't know if I'm defining as much as I'm explaining what I used to do that makes me believe that designing in code.
Yeah.
What about you?
Yeah. No, same, because I taught myself to code, as a kid. I was making GeoCities websites, I was doing, CSS, DHTML, like all that stuff way back in the
Yes.
day. My early jobs were like make a picture in Photoshop, but also take that and turn it into an HTML and CSS skeleton. And then you would hand that code over alongside the pictures to the engineers. And so they would do all the functionality. And so for me, that was very much how I learned to design also, in the early part of my career and even before my career. And so it's skipping again, that kind of, I said I was just doing Photoshop, but that was what was expected because you had to have like every step and every screen. But I think for me now, it's a lot about making skipping that non-functional step, right? Like skipping the picture and going from the idea, the wireframe, the sketch, and sketching it out in code. And but I want to kind of disambiguate a little bit because there's so much going on around
Mhm.
designing with code and designing with these AI tools that I think when people hear things like design with code tool or an AI design tool, they're thinking about maybe lots of other parts of the process that, at least at the moment, I don't think these tools do and maybe never will. Which is like there's, we're seeing this with like Google Sketch, right? Like that's like iterating on like brand aesthetic. And then there's like, oh, can you run it through like an audit and do all this like polish? There's these sort of like refinement layers that you might want to do. There's copywriting, and that's before we even talk about all the parts of the design process that actually don't have anything to do with UI
Right.
at all,
Right.
right? The design thinking. I mean, I mentioned copywriting, but copywriting, just like what's the actual problem? What are the trade-offs? The UX part, that trade-off between like UX and copy. And a lot of that kind of creative stuff, you're talking about wireframing, sketching, like sketching on paper. I've been doing a lot of paper sketching because that's all this other stuff that isn't about the UI. And when I think about designing with code, I'm thinking about the part where you go from various sketches and wireframes and ideas to creating something to see if it really is going to work and be the way that you want. And you can do that in Figma. And we've spent the last 10 or so years pigeonholing designers into only working in that phase
Right.
in Figma. And you can get to like a weird sort of high fidelity, but you don't actually experience, okay, well, when I click on this checkbox, this little banner comes up. Well, okay, I can have two pictures, one with and one without, but you don't see the animation. You don't see if that feels right. You don't see if it's jumpy or jerky. You don't see how it's going to be, responsive on mobile or desktop or flexibility. And so to me, the value of doing that step in the code is that you actually get to experience that like instantaneously.
100%.
And you get to be like, oh, when I clicked that, it was kind of jerky. Should I add an animation? Let's try that. No, that was weird. Actually, like the UX of this doesn't make any sense, even though it made sense in my head when I sketched it on paper. And it's a lot harder, I think, to sense that when you're working with a picture of some kind, something that's a little bit more static.
Yeah, I agree. And I think what you're pointing about on there is that all that iteration that you would be doing is just when you have the ability to do the iteration is so much faster, right? Because
Right.
before that, if you're doing Figma related stuff, you are beholden to the tool to get it to behave in whatever particular way, right? And when you give it to a design engineer, the design engineer has all of the tools because they could do whatever they're as good as an engineer would be. And I'm saying that because it's not like they're not engineers, but I'm saying in terms of like when a designer would complain and say, "Oh, the engineer says that we can't do this," that's a lie. It's a lie.
We can
We
secretly we can do anything.
we
It's just
could
a matter
do
of whether or not we want to.
yeah, we could do anything, and yes, some of it's whether or not we want to, but I think some of it is
No.
also weighing out the pros and cons and going, okay, well, what about the performance, the accessibility, the
Yes. Yeah.
locals, the complexity, all of that stuff that
Well, when we say
that
we don't
design
want
is
to,
asking
what we
for.
mean is like, oh man, I can, but actually that would be challenging in this way and hard here and
Right.
hard to maintain, and it's not actually going to solve your problem. And so I think we get into this adversarial relationship with designers, designers versus engineers. The engineers say no, the designers want this, and the engineers don't care about the UX of the product and the like all of this back and forth. When in reality, we want to do the same thing, and the more we can talk the same language about what matters and what trade-offs. I have seen this so many times over my career. Designers got some idea in Figma and they've chosen something because it kind of makes sense it kind of makes sense when you're thinking about it in a more static way, or it makes sense and I'm going to say this in a completely non-derogatory way, designers who are listening, it makes sense in your non-technical comprehension of what's possible. because there's just things that you don't know are easy or things that you don't know are
Hmm.
hard.
Hmm.
And when you get to talk to somebody and you get to work with somebody who has a understanding of the browser and all the CSS things that you can do and what you can do in JavaScript and what needs GSAP for animation and what doesn't and like what components we have and how the code actually works. Sometimes the thing that you have in the picture was like, actually, I mean, I can do that, but it would be really hard and janky, and I don't think it's actually going to do what you want. We could do this instead. And to me, that's the idea of like working in the medium, right? Like I
Oh yeah.
want my designers, and I think the value of learning to design and code is that you've opened up your like map of things that are available to you because you understand how your medium, e.g. the browser or iOS or whatever actually functions. um and that used to be, well, you have to learn how to code,
Yeah.
but
It's funny
it,
that you mentioned that. I think because Randy Oest was on the show a couple of weeks ago, and he mentioned something about the knowing the medium, and he had a phrase for it that I was like, oh, that's really good. I now fucking forgot what the phrase was. I'm gonna look it up at
go
the
listen
end.
to that
Yeah,
episode. I know, I
I'm
need
gonna listen
to.
to it now. But I would have the same kind of like a feeling, because I used to describe this as, if you are an artist working on canvas with paint, there's a certain, you could of course make whatever thing that you want with the canvas on paint, no matter what materials that you use. But if you know how the materials work, you'll most likely make a better product than if you didn't know how the materials work. So it's very similar to, again, thinking that you're designing for what is effectively a poster. Like I see a lot of designers are just like, oh yeah, it's just this one screen, right? Meaning, while like they're forgetting all about the responsiveness or the different device sizes, or even now that we've gotten past that 16 years later, which actually, happy birthday, responsive web design. That article was a couple, like I think 20, the May 25th. But
Yeah, we're the same age.
yeah, exactly. Um, Now, thank goodness, we've gotten designers in the majority to understand that responsive design is a thing. But now the thing that I'm finding out is they forget that their sites are being translated. And they're like, oh, yeah, it's always in English. And you're like, no, it's not. No, Google Translate is 100% a thing. And I love the statistic. People are more likely to buy something when it's in their language, twice as more likely to buy
I mean,
something
is
when
that
it's in their
surprise? It's
language.
not a surprise.
No, it's not. But the thing is that when you don't think about it, you just,
Yeah.
again, pigeonhole yourself into thinking it's only English, and then your design could potentially break if you're so, rigid in the
Yeah.
way that you're thinking about this stuff.
Well,
So
it goes so
yeah,
far beyond responsive design,
100%.
right? Like we talk a lot about this with like I'm gonna have to dig up this website and put it in the show notes, but there's this site and it's like every like viewport
Oh,
size,
viewport
you know.
FYI, I think, right?
Yeah, that sounds right.
I think that's right.
And it's like, it's not just like, okay, responsive, like mobile desktop or like mobile tablet desktop. It's like literally anything.
Mm-hmm.
Like we were joking at work the other day. When you look in the like logs, if Android users, the Android will show up as K.
Mm-hmm.
And we were like, K, what is K? And we were joking that it was Kindle.
Oh my
Like, can you
God.
imagine like somebody trying to use your app on Kindle, on like the Kindle browser? But like that's what it is. It's not, we can detect viewport size, but that doesn't mean you're on a device. You could be on a desktop, but your screen is small, so you're getting this like mobile view.
You could be on a
And there's
refrigerator, like Spotify was talking about Encore being on a refrigerator.
amazing.
Like that's what it was.
Amazing. And there's so much flexibility, right? It's not just responsive design anymore. It's flexibility. All the different ways that your components can show up, all the different ways things can be accessed. We were having a problem the other day where we have a how many years have you smoked?
Okay.
Like number, like when it's like a number field.
Hmm.
And I think we were having an issue where if you were accidentally kind of like hit it when you were scrolling, like with your thumb on your
Mm,
phone, it would scroll it.
right.
And we were like, oh, you could turn off. They were gonna like disable the like scrolling, and I'm like, okay, but if you do that now on mobile devices, you don't, when you click it, you don't get the number view, and then you have to actually like type it. And so that kind of stuff you cannot reasonably replicate in a static
Right.
application. And, Figma is going to catch a lot of strays in this episode, but it goes way back before that. And like all of the design we do now is came from print design. We can talk about that in a second. But when you're in that, anything kind of static, like you could make and annotate, and then here's a screenshot with the mobile scroll, number field and here, but you still don't get a sense of what it feels like.
Right.
And it's just not reasonable to do all of that kind of annotation and like think about all of those things. The tools we use constrain our thinking. And I think this is what you were touching on. It's much harder to think about that stuff when you're in this static place. And this is one of the things that I'm genuinely really excited about, because my whole career, again, like has been kind of design in this more static way. And we've seen design get more and more and more flexible, or I should say UIs have to get more and more and more and more flexible. Since, the early days of the internet, you might have, I'm going to out myself, IE 6, 800, best viewed on 800 by 600 and IE 6. Like there was a period of time where there was a single viewport and like a single browser, and then it was mobile, and like now we're getting into like generative UIs where like I don't know, I haven't really seen anybody doing this yet, but very soon I'm confident we are going to see the UI that you get when you come to mywebsite.com, myapp.com is mostly or completely generated based on your preferences and your needs and what you're trying to do. Like not just like, your algorithm feed, but like, at Color, we do cancer screening, diagnosis and support, and everybody who comes in has a different family history, different concerns. If you have a diagnosis, you're in treatment, you have different things that you are actively doing, you have doctor's appointments, you have visits, you have all these things. Right now, the dashboard is static and everybody gets maybe you get this card or that card. And like, what is that going to be like when the whole thing can just be generated off of design system components? So we're just getting more and more and more and more flexible. And I think designers, design engineers, we all have to start being able to think in a systemic way where we can actually design in a flexible way. And a static mockup is just not going to cut it.
I love that you're touching upon this thing right now. Okay. Because this is something that I'm actually fighting with myself. Okay. Because on the one hand, I am 137,000% behind you about this idea of basically going hyper-inclusive design. This thing is made for me to achieve my goal, and I don't care about anybody else, right? It's, Android 17 just released the idea of being able to make your own widgets. Like I need to track my steps or whatever, and I don't like anybody else's stuff. I want my own, and you could just generate your own widget on the fucking thing. So like
democratizing design, I love it.
It's crazy, right? It removes all the egotistical designers out there. It's like, sorry, your design didn't work for me. I'm making my own. Like I love that idea until we hit the filter bubble, where now, even before talking about the design part, when you start searching for stuff online, you'll end up searching for the stuff that's in your bubble, and you won't potentially go outside of your bubble and look at things that are the antithesis of whatever you're thinking about. Well, now, when you have your own experience in your own little bubble, how will we ever go outside of that bubble and look elsewhere? And some of us are certainly doing that actively, getting inspiration outside and things like that. But general public wise, just trying to achieve their goals, would they know that there's a better mousetrap out there if they've made their own mousetrap? Yeah. I don't know. What is your take on that?
Oh man. Confess, not something I spent a ton of time thinking deeply about. So we're going to be totally off the cuff here.
Let's do it.
I think some of that is the responsibility of design, real design, like the real design process, real design thinking at a company, regardless of what your product looks like, that you have ways to build in and surface and think really deeply about what it is that you're providing to your customers, or in our case, your patients. Like, what is their experience going to be like? And, you know, it doesn't matter what the actual like artifact is. There are ways that you have control as a designer over like the mock-up or the copy
Hmm.
or like
Hmm.
the algorithm that is generating the UI. And I think it also matters a lot more or less in different scenarios, right? Like, let's talk about, ye classic to do widget, or uh, weather widget, or step tracker widget that you want to see on your Android or whatever.
Hmm.
Like, especially, I love to do apps as an example, and there's a reason. The reason that there's like 85 million to do apps is because everybody's brain is a little bit different,
Hmm.
and it's really, really hard to build a static UI around something as nebulous as goals, priorities, and action items and to-dos that matches with your brain. And your brain at any given moment, like today or next week or in a busy season or in a, you know personal work, like what your work is, like it's basically impossible to replicate the inside of your head exactly the way that you want. And so I don't know if better, like, what does better mean? Like, the better to do widget for me is not better for you. And I think it's kind of hubris on this point, on the like, from us designers, to say we're going to build the best UI for the best to do app.
Yeah,
Now,
it's immediately universal design, right? Like it's
right,
immediately saying the 80% and missing a whole bunch of people in there, which
right.
we could capture.
But a to do app is a very different ballgame than, again, I'm thinking about color, right? Like, we are helping patients understand their cancer risk or manage a diagnosis or treatment. And that's just a whole different kind of like responsibility than making a UI for like a calendar or a to-do app. And I'm not saying that those things aren't serious. You build a calendar, you don't want people to miss their important meetings, but it's also like what we would allow in terms of like stuff that AI generates that we're going to show directly to a patient or not. Like, we're thinking about that way, way harder because the impact could be so damaging. And so, in terms of the idea of like the filter bubble, like, what if there's something better out there? Like, on one hand, I kind of feel like, who says that we know better?
Yes.
And then for some things, maybe you have to build in some like guardrails. Like, anyway, in rant. I don't know. It's a challenge. It'll be a challenge.
I think it is a challenge, certainly. I mean, that's the thing that I'm battling with because, yeah, on the one hand, I'm like, some of these designers are just off the chain, right? I mean, I have a personal vendetta against modals. So when I see a modal, I'm like, okay, what designer decided that this was a good idea? But practically any point in time. But on the flip side, thinking about me, I'm going, okay, well, now my interface doesn't have any modals in because I've designed it that way. Well, what new pattern am I missing because I only have seen these patterns? I mean, I'm
Hmm.
speaking about that because of the modal situation, right? You have designers out there that are only choosing modals because they've seen another modal out there and they continue to choose it that way. When in reality, if you take a second to think, and this was from my Converge talk like in October, if you take a moment to think, there's other opportunities out there for different patterns that we could be using that actually could improve the experience for the
Yeah.
user. So like when we're talking about the measurement of this stuff, and it was actually just doing some research on it this morning, people are talking a lot about the quality of design. And I think it's actually the user satisfaction of the goal, right? That's the outcome. So we could deliver the highest quality product to the user, but if the user is not satisfied, then we kind of lose, right? Like
Yeah.
that's and it could be a pile of shit that we deliver from our point of view, but it could be
Right.
exactly what they want and they
Yeah.
come back and they buy more shit, right?
Yeah.
And is
Well,
that
and
better? I don't even know.
yeah, well, I mean, better. Yeah, I mean, it depends. Better is relative, but really, like, the relative goodness or badness of a modal, or a bottom sheet, or a longer page, or a this or a that has a whole lot to do with the experience of receiving that.
Hmm.
Um, you know, a lot of times, we were talking about this actually earlier today. We were talking about the bottom sheet as a pattern, and you know how you get the bottom sheet as like the upsell at the end of a flow. And like the bottom sheet is the thing that you click to be like, get me the fuck out of here. Like, I want to just get to the thing that I want. And so we were talking about a real legitimate use case for that pattern. And then we were like, is that going to feel like, I think that might actually be one of the better design options we have, but it also is maybe not going to feel, it's going to feel like selling in a moment that we're not actually trying to sell you anything. And that experience, and it sounds so cliche to be like the user experience, but I feel like we're in a moment where, I touched on this earlier, we're so focused on the UI artifact, right? Like, oh my God, you guys, we can generate some UI with AI now. Like designers or builders, everybody can do code. Everything's generated. Skip Figma. We're just going to like generate stuff. And I know that this horse has already been beaten to death, but because we're in this moment where we're really, really focused on the artifact, the really challenging part of the conversation is, well, what does that UX feel like? Is that actually the right way of doing that? Is there a different, should we use a modal? Like, is there some different thing that we haven't explored? And I guess one counter to your take there is that convention sometimes is more valuable than novelty, because the design, like, yeah, we can make a more novel pattern that's really cool and interesting. We can make a better designed, like, oh, we think it looks all beautiful. But convention is really, really powerful. Yep. People, general population, I don't have to be like people who aren't tech savvy. I think that's such a cop out, but like,
we're trying to meet user expectations, basically, right? The better you meet an expectation, the more that they're potentially going to achieve their goal. If we give them something new, if they have to
hunt for the button, it looks different in this app. They don't know where to find it. Like we've gotten used to. This is when people are like, all websites look the same, all apps look the same, and I'm like, yeah, that means people know how to use them. Like, does that mean it's the best pattern ever? E.g. modals? No, but it is. There's a real value, I think, in convention. Right. And I think, not to go on a totally different tangent, but I think when we talk about taste, like all the like bullshit around taste right now, they just mostly mean convention.
Oh, girl.
And
oh my God. That's another
we're not going to go. It's a whole different episode.
Yeah, we're gonna have to go on another, we're gonna schedule another one 2 months out with Elyse and be like, all right, well, we're gonna talk about taste.
We're gonna talk about taste.
Oh my God.
John Voss had a great video that he posted about taste the other day.
I did see that.
So good.
Yes,
go watch it.
Definitely watch the video for John Voss. I have to get him on, actually. Oh my God. His presentations have been amazing. Speaking
100 out of 10.
Oh my God. Yes, definitely. So I want to go far a little bit here because, so we talk about source of truth in design systems a lot. And I believe it's always been code. I think we've already kind of established that because of the design being an artifact and not really doing anything. Code makes a lot of sense for being the source of truth. Well, now what we're having is this, generated code, lots of generated code. And for lots of people out there that don't necessarily know the quality of the code that's being generated, but are getting the right outputs there, do we need to care about the code underneath? And the reason I'm bringing this up is I'm going to go back to another episode with Matthew Strum on, where we were talking about a little bit about Tailwind, but one of the things that he brought up was, do you know the assembly code that's written underneath the bottom here? How could you trust the assembly code and that it's doing the right thing, right? So he's basically arguing that, do we need to trust the JavaScript or the CSS or anything else that's underneath the whole thing when we are getting the results at the surface level? So what is your take on that?
Strong agree. Makes everybody so uncomfortable though. So uncomfortable. And I mean, it makes me uncomfortable, but I think that's where we're gonna somewhat end up. And I think the layers of abstraction is the right argument, because a lot of times when you say, we don't really need to care so much about the details in the code, is because that's like, it's the only way we understand how to control quality or what we get. But we're like, we don't understand how the browser works. We don't understand how JavaScript works. You don't understand how assembly works. You don't understand how I mean, like, how does the browser paint? Like, I mean, there are definitely people out there who can explain, but like in your day-to-day workflow, you're just like, I use the component, it works. I do a design, it works. Like, I mean, I'm writing JavaScript and React and I'm like, React lifecycle, like whatever, it works. And I think we're not quite there yet because especially with generative AI, garbage in, garbage out. And what's in is, training on everything generic, all the websites in the world, right? Or like all these public GitHub repos. And there's also a lot of, AI harness that you can put around it. So like your training, your rules, your patterns. But the LLMs, when you put your code base in there, it's looking at all the old shitty patterns too.
Right.
And everybody kind of is like blaming this on it being like non-deterministic, but like that really kind of irks me because like guess what, humans are non-deterministic too. So like you're going to look at some old pattern and copy it and be like, well, I copied it out of the code base, therefore it's correct, right? It's like no. But we have this sort of knowledge, this social knowledge where it's like, oh yeah, I know that part of the code base is like icky. We don't go over there. Only the things the light touches. But like you have to teach the LLMs to do this. And so right now, I don't think we can just trust blindly the output. But I think that this is probably the direction that we're going to go, and it's probably the direction design systems are going to go. I'm seeing this a lot right now as I teach our designers to get closer to the code, because everybody, design system folks listening, y'all know there's some UI in your product that was built 90 to 100% with the design system components. It's just using the components. It's just using props. It's like baked. Then there's stuff that's like, maybe it's like 60 to 70% with the components, and then they've got some custom overrides, and then there's like some stuff that they've kind of done on their own, or there's like a component that they built that maybe that's reused in that part of the product, but it's not really part of the system. And then there's full on like just like one-offs, like and I don't mean that in a non-derogatory. Sometimes you just need to build thing one time, right? Like it's just it's only going to be used in this one place. It's not even an experimental test. It's just like, well, we only need it right here. And when you have a designer who is non-technical coming in, especially with an LLM, and being like, I want, a form with radio buttons that's like this and over here, but now I want radio buttons to be this other way. Radio button example, our radio button component was vertical only. So we have like an outlined version that's like big boxes, and it was vertical only. And we were doing some, designing with AI generated code. And we're like, oh, we want the radios to be side by side. And the component couldn't do it. So the LLM helpfully just recreated the component with the like MUI internals to make it side by side. And from the designer's perspective, from a visual perspective, it was like, looked great. It looked exactly like what they wanted. But the code obviously was like a complete sort of like copy with edits of the design system component. And, and then they're looking at it and they're going, oh, that is the component. It's not the component. How come, this thing on the desktop, I thought that was a button. I thought that was tabs, but it's actually not in the code. Like everybody is learning all the like ins and outs and nuances of the fact that the code is not actually as straightforward as like having these sets of components. And there are things that look like it's a button, but it's actually a link. Like, oh, the in the app bar, it's got an underline, so it looks like tabs, but it's not actually the tab component. The tab component is something else. And so I say all of that because I think there's this huge learning curve that's happening where, maybe as a non-technical designer, you're expecting the design system to behave in a certain way or the code to behave in a certain way, and it is or isn't. And then there's also, what do we do as a design system practitioners to say, okay, well, that radio button example, in some cases, what I actually want you or the LLM to do is update the component. And there are some cases where you're just doing explorations, and I don't actually want you to actually update the component. I want you to make a copy because we're just trying to see if we like it or not. And when do I do which one? how do I surface the information to a designer that's like, hey, that's not actually using the system? How do you like run a design through some sort of audit?
Yeah.
And then coming back to your question, does it even matter?
Yes.
And and at some point, like, thinking way far down the road, if the LLMs keep getting better and better and better, the classic example is like, well, we don't want hex codes all over the place. And we have a token, you just change the value of the token. But like if your LLM was actually good enough, and they're not right now, but if they were actually good enough to be like, find me every place that we use this purple as a primary color, but not as this other type of highlight where we use the same hex color, and change it all to this other value, does it actually matter that there's 85,000 instances? Like, no. And you don't care because you're doing that validation based on the actual, like, your experience of using the final product. And I do think that that's where we are going to end up. Maybe not all that, maybe not the hex color example, but this idea that like the way that if your changes are any good is not by the code, it's by validating through usage. Did it do what I want? Did it increase NPS? Did it decrease drop off? Did it look right?
Right.
Like, and that's always been the point anyway.
Yeah. Wow. So first off, let's just tell the audience, tokens are dead. Just put your hex codes back in. It's still a problem. Yeah, they're dead now. You don't need them. That's the
hex code.
I know it's fine. But no, I think I'm aligning to that a lot these days in terms of because one of the things that I was actually looking at. Well, this is before, I think before I was working with AI. But one of the big things about, I believe it was Shad Sienna, or it might have been Daisy. But the big thing that they were pushing was that you wouldn't install their components.
Yep.
You would just copy it down, and now it's yours. Now you are responsible for this thing. So there was something very interesting about that, because it's not, I mean, they're like closer to being patterns than components, if we're going to, disambiguate the definitions a little bit, where a component is this like installable thing that, is ever the same as it goes through the system, where a pattern is just like, please follow this, and if you don't, it's up to you or whatever. So now it's like, these things are becoming patterns, and that's what we saw a lot of in these LLMs and these agents, that they were just reusing patterns and not reusing components. And we've been forcing them over time to be reusing components. But I think when talking about the what you said so far about the tokens and the components, all of those, and even the code, all of these things have been specifically meant for us as humans to help us stay aligned. But do we need that if the humans aren't writing the code, right? If it's just some machine writing the code and it has all of its context and all the stuff that it needs, as long as we get the right output, then get rid of the tokens, get rid of the components, get rid of it all. I got the UI that I was intended at the end, right? And somehow it's consistent, right? If we're gonna think about consistency non-deterministically, if that's a real world, but I mean, maybe it's right.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's definitely a little magic wand, like magical thinking about that. I mean, I do think we're going to go in that direction. I don't know if I'm still going to advocate for maintainable, understandable, like reusable components. I think, you're talking about Shad Cien, and I really do like, I do think that Shad Cien is actually seeing much better results with the LLMs, because the components, you do kind of like take a copy of them into your code base. Now, once they're there, they're a reusable component that the product can use, but you're not installing it. It's like we use Material UI, and you install the Material UI package, and then all that code is in node modules, and the LLMs really struggle to like get in there and understand the details of the components. But LLMs, just like humans, do better when the patterns are consistent and the code is documented, and the prop, like the names. I was talking with Murphy Truman. I had her on the podcast, and if you're not reading Murphy Truman, and you work in design system, like, what the hell are you doing? Go binge her whole everything right now. She's talking a lot about naming and about, the semantic value of components and properties. And, it's funny because we're like, oh, all this is for humans. And that's true, except that LLMs also work on, comparison and like what words mean. And
Mhm.
I've been trotting out this example all year, but we have, our semantic colors, error, info, warning, success, just like
Mhm.
everybody. And because the LLMs are trained on all of these, generic component libraries that are out there and all of these, apps that are out there, typically those are used, you got status chips, right? Like delayed, shipped, completed,
Mhm.
on hold, like whatever. And so when we are working with these LLM design tools and it's using our system, like we have a chip and we have semantic colors and we're like, make a dashboard that shows, a patient like their cancer risk. And it's like red error chip, high risk. And we're like, we don't do that.
Mhm.
Like that's scary AF. We're not like, we don't do that. But that semantic meaning is encoded into the component and it's encoded into the token. And we have not yet figured out exactly how to encode into, our agent rules or our design rules that means something different. So Murphy's been talking a lot about that kind of thing, about the naming and the like the LMs have to understand what a thing is for. And so it's not just card, it's, you know, we have a thing called service entry card, which doesn't mean anything to you, but like it means something to us and there's documentation and it's in the code and it's in the, code comments. And so I'm still going to advocate for
Mhm.
consistent, maintainable, reusable components, things like that, because I do actually think that gets you a better output.
Mhm.
So as an interesting thought experiment, like, oh, what if it could just generate its own, radio, accordion, whatever, like every time it needed one? And I do think that there's some interesting things to push on there. I think we're going to get better outputs when we have something that's a little more consistent. And to bring it back to designing and designing with code, when you're working with those consistent components and that naming that is meaningful, you actually have a better experience as a designer who maybe doesn't understand the code so much to look at a thing and be like, oh, I know what that is. I can hover over it. I can get the component name. I can see the props, and it doesn't just say like box or like radio or card. Like you actually have a semantically meaningful component that relates to your product.
Mhm.
And I think kind of actually in the opposition to what you were saying, where everything is a one off, I think what we're actually going to see is more like named product semantic components.
Mhm.
Like I know this was like anathema a couple of years ago, but like you had one card and it
Mhm.
was just a generic card and you could just make whatever you wanted. And the LLMs really struggle with that. And I think we're going to go back to kind of like even older behaviors, which is there's 10 cards and they're all very specific, service entry card, test result card, kit information card. Like we're actually going to maybe see these more like semantic defined things because I think that gives both the LLMs and the human designers using a design with code tool a lot more insight into what's actually there.
I'm 100% behind you, I think, on that in particular. And yes, I'm being a little, I guess, spacey in this just to make us think about these things. But I think it's the bottom line, I think, is intent. And I think that's why I've, held on to that concept for a very long time. It's in the book about intent, and I align that specifically with tokens back in talking about it there. But
Mhm.
the intent of exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, if there was just one card and it's generic, you don't know when you're supposed to use it because there's no intent behind it. It's just generic fucking container, right? When you start having intents behind things, then it becomes more clear to everyone when you're supposed to use it, right? So the intent of this particular card versus this card versus this card, it's actually a little funny because I'm thinking about accessibility now, where you put roles and attributes to these things to express to these assistive technology what's going on. And
Mhm.
I remember early on in this AI, typhoon, that people were like, oh, we need to get into accessibility because that's how the machines are reading this stuff. I'm like, guys, do you remember this was supposed to be for the humans first? I mean, I appreciate what you're doing,
Yeah. Same with
but
documentation, where
just
like it took
doing it
the
the wrong way.
computers for us to finally like write the documentation that would have been helpful for humans.
Right, imagine that, right? So I'm glad that we went in that direction for a little while. I don't know how long it's been going on, but that in and of itself, talking about the intention of these things. The intent is, okay, this is for this is for this, and this is for this. And I think the challenge now for designers will be to define the intention, because
Mhm.
that's the thing that I find that has been missing in many of the design conversations that I've had. They usually are designing off vibes, like it's been happening for years without the actual term being used. But it's
Mhm.
like, I feel we should do this, or I don't like the look of that, or I this and I that, when you forget about, the problem that we're solving and the
Invention.
intent. Yeah, yeah. And the intent that we're trying to deliver, or users trying to make, I should say, more
Yeah.
accurately, you know?
You know how much nuance and complexity there is in a design system for a big product. Do you actually think that it's going to be possible to clearly document all the nuance of intent of a design language?
I think it's possible. Um, the problem ends up being is humans. It's the opinions, right? It's that's the problem. I mean, the reality of it is that from a design system standpoint, I had this conversation with Brad, is that I believe that the design system is an agreement, and if we can get all the humans to agree, it's all very easy, right? And all of that intention can be artifacts of the agreement. But the fact is that we've had a very hard job of trying to get the organization to agree. And in many cases, instead, what we've done is come down with stone tablets and go, no,
Yeah.
no, no, this is what we're going to do now because you all can't agree, you know?
Yeah.
So I think there's a world where if I think in smaller companies, it's a lot easier, certainly, but the more humans you add, the harder it is to get agreement, right?
Mm. Yeah, but I feel like the reason it's hard to get agreement is because there's so much nuance in what has to get built. And that
Hmm.
nuance comes from like what might be best for the user, what might be best for the business. And I don't
Oh, of
necessarily
course.
mean those in like diametrically opposed ways, but like what's possible in our tech stack, what's possible on a device versus the web, what how does this look on mobile versus desktop? Like, you know, we were doing a design crit earlier and we are like, okay, here's two metrics, like drop off or like options. Like how do we sort of like balance, the business and the user? And so then once you actually start to turn that into UI, it's like, well, maybe we don't exactly have the right component in the system. And we've spent all this time building these very like generic reusable composable components. And I think we still have to have that because I mean, even though I was just saying we're going to go in this more like product semantic component pattern way, which I do think we are, but you still have to have those Legos because you're like, well, actually, the best solution in for this particular UI problem right here isn't these three other things that we already have in the system or the three other things that we did over here. It's actually got to be its own thing. And you're talking about, coming down from on high with stone tablets. It was like, well, you can't do that because it's not in the system.
Hmm.
And it's like, well, that's actually the best design solution. And so that kind of stuff, I don't know if we're ever going to be able to fully articulate all of the um, types of decision making trade offs around intent that you have to make to do something like that while keeping it feeling like your design language. And I don't know if we should like, and not to be like, oh, there's got to be something left for the humans, but like every case, every problem is so different, and your business is so different, your users are so different, the data you've collected at any given moment. And so I've been thinking a lot with my team about what are the we've been saying like indivisible rules.
Mm.
For example, we have a color, we're using material UI, we have primary.main, but the LLMs really like to think about that as a color that they can use for like titles and like big text things because it's primary. And it's like, okay, we are going to have to put in a rule that's like text can't be primary.main.
Hmm.
And like, maybe we can change the token name, we can, whatever, but like those kinds of things, like that's true. And we agree to your point about the design system being the agreement. Like we all agree about that.
Hmm.
And then you get into these more nuanced things where it's like, we can't agree, the LMs can't agree. we're going to agree this way one time and this way another time because we've got different information. Like, how are you going to encode all of that?
Mhm.
And I don't know if we should even try. Like, not again, not because of like, oh, something left for the humans, but because like futile effort. Like it is ineffable.
Maybe. I mean, you know, I'm going to react to the primary main thing myself
Yeah.
because I believe that to be an awful name for a token, and I'm not
Yeah.
about to.
That's mooey. I didn't do it.
Yeah,
Don't blame me.
you know, there was agreement. Someone agreed, and it was like, what about, right? But I think, you know, there is. It was very challenging for me when I was writing the book. I'm going to talk about the book because I talk about intents in the book. It was very challenging for me to do the exercise to figure out intent in such a way, just for this very small subset of describing our experience, that the exercise of trying to do it for all experience is very overwhelming to me.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
it's like there's a world where if maybe that we chunk it up or something like that, because this was a small chunk, right? That was a small chunk that I think I did. I would like to think that I did a really good job of describing the intention and why all those things are there so that it's clear. But I actually I mentioned it in the book, and I've mentioned it before. This is that one of the things that I think is not possible until we can define intent is actually semantic border radius, specifically like concentric border radius, where you want to have, you know, the button and the card, you want that nice rounding that happens, you know, between them where it looks like it matches. And there's lots of different like conditionals that end up in there. And what I've landed on is that that would only work, in my opinion, and from my research, if we had intentional layout patterns, which no
Yeah.
one, as far as I've seen, has actually tried to tackle, right? But I think it's if I had time, I would consider tackling, just to go ahead and give it a shot to like kind of addend my the book that I've been doing. But I think that was a very interesting thing to discover, so to speak, that in this conversation that we're having, I think there's intentions there. It's just, do we have the resources, the time, the money, the effort, the
Mhm.
interest to actually go into that stuff,
Yeah.
or do we just?
We can just keep it all in our heads.
Well, I was just about to say, do we just give it to AI to keep it in its head because it's the omni mind, right? It has
Well,
all of
that's
it
the
stuff.
process of defining it. Like, you can't put it into the AI unless you can define it.
Hmm.
And, you know, this is why I was saying maybe I think it's kind of futile, because we rely, Murphy and I were talking about this on the show, like we rely on humans having the, you know, not just the decision making ability, but like the sort of vague context, or like I know who to ask, or like we kind of understand that, you know, we don't do semantic colored chips, like, and some of that you can actually define, and should define, but a lot of it, it it's it is a little bit ineffable. um you know, and you can't just say to the LLM like, make a better design, like read my mind. So any of this design language information you're going to put in, you have to codify, and the practice of doing that, the process of doing that is extremely hard.
Right.
And I don't think I don't think that means we shouldn't do it, but I also, um I guess I feel like, you are we going to repeat the insanely overcomplicated token architectures by
Mm.
trying to do the same thing, right? It's like, we're going to define every single decision making
Mm-mm.
point of the design with a token.
No, thank
Okay,
you.
it's like, okay, we're going to do the same thing, but we're just going to do it in agents.md, like design rules, or like, you know, all of these things are choices, like design choices and decisions, but some of them are really, really nuanced and relative to each other, and relative to, you know, how the product was 3 years ago, and how the product is now. And I don't know. I kind of wonder if it's like we just beat our heads against over engineering some really complicated way of trying to define all of this stuff for like decreasing returns. And maybe some of it is something that we maybe a lot of it is stuff we should define, and maybe some of it is stuff that we should let be flexible.
I think that the reality is everything's very, very new. We're all still trying to figure it out. So that's why we have all these questions that are coming up here. But
Yeah, more questions than answers.
yeah, imagine that. But we're running out of time here, and admittedly, I'm afraid that this podcast would actually be about 3 hours long. Because I could absolutely talk
It's
about all
true.
this stuff all day. But Elise, I want to give you the opportunity to plug anything that you like to plug out there before we sign it out.
Yeah. Well, obviously going to plug my own podcast. It's Design Systems on Theme, designsystemsontheme.com. Please go check it out. I'm interviewing industry leading practitioners, talking to them about all the questions, more questions than answers, but really trying to hear from folks who are solving this stuff in their companies, really thinking about design systems at a level that's not just the code and the tokens, but the process, the people, the organizational behavior change, as I like to say, just really seeing who is leading the way. So we have a lot of fun over there. If there's anybody you want to see on the show or you want to come on the show, send me a message. Come do that. Yeah, that's my plug. Come listen to my podcast. It's
Yeah.
just like this.
Absolutely, yeah. You should absolutely do that. It's been a great podcast. I've listened to several
Thank you.
episodes over there, and I really appreciate the work that you put into it from there. Just really, really great quality. So
Thank you.
thank you. And thank you for being on the show over here as well. I really do appreciate it, and all of the insight that you provided. And hopefully we can have another chat and talk about taste, maybe. Right?
Yeah, taste. And I mean, there were like three things we said we were going to touch on, and we totally didn't, like why all design tools are children of the print design process. I don't know, call me, maybe I'll talk about it on the podcast. There's so many more things here, so many more things around designing with code, the tools that are out there, the process for folks. I feel like we should just do like a reprise. We need to do
We got to do it.
part two.
Yeah, we're gonna definitely do it. But yes, thank you again. We're gonna. But also, thank you for watching the show. And before you go, please help out the show by hitting the like and subscribe button just to get notified next time that we go live. And feel free to continue the conversation on the official Design Systems Discord by going to discord.ds.house. There it is on the bottom right there. Play nice in those comments, and I'll see you on the internet. Bye.